Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and while I have reviewed plenty of OLED monitors over the last couple of years, we often get some common feedback that while the performance is great and they are often a step up above LCD displays, they are often just too expensive for many people. Pricing is of course always going to be relative, but today I am very excited to be checking out the AOC Agon Pro AG276QZD, a 1440p 240Hz OLED monitor that is by far and away the cheapest OLED we have ever reviewed, currently priced at just under £500. It's worth making it clear then right off the bat what we're looking at here isn't anything particularly new in the sense that it's actually using a first gen LG WOLED panel, so the same one we saw in the Asus PG27AQDM, LG's own monitor as well, alongside the Corsair Xeneon 27QHD 240. That means it's not going to be bringing us any of the latest and greatest improvements to things like text fringing or overall brightness levels, but this monitor is all about the price point. Being just under £500 at the time of filming is what makes me so interested in checking this out. Before we go any further as well, it is worth just quickly saying that currently I'm not 100% sure if that £500 asking price is a new permanent price. At the time of filming, it has been around this price for over a week, and it was actually slightly lower as of Amazon Prime Day, where it hit about, I think, £470. However, even if this is just a temporary price point, the fact that it's at £500 right now tells me it will be at £500 again in the future, which is what makes me so excited to check out this screen. Kicking things off then with a look at the design, I honestly have to say I like what AOC has done here. The main panel area is very clean with a four-sided bezel-free approach, so there's not even an obvious chin, helping to make things look quite sleek. The rear of the display is made from black plastic, and the stand attaches in the middle of an asymmetrical area which is flanked by RGB LEDs, as you can see here. Now, the base of the stand is also asymmetrical, and I know that won't appeal to everybody, but personally I did warm up to it after a few days, and it is pleasingly compact at about 26 centimeters across, so it really doesn't take up much room on your desk. It's also good to see that the stand offers a full array of ergonomic adjustments, including height adjust up to 130mm, there's 30 degrees of swivel in both directions, tilt from 4 degrees downwards to 21.5 degrees upwards, and we also get 90-degree pivot both left and right. The one thing I would say is that the stand doesn't feel of the highest quality. It is a bit creaky when you're making any adjustments, but the good news is you can use an adapter for any third-party VESA 100x100 stands or mounting arms. As for display inputs, AOC has opted for 2 DisplayPort 1.4 and then 2 HDMI ports, but unfortunately these are HDMI 2.0 rather than 2.1, so they do cap out at 144Hz, which is a definite shame. We also find a 2-port USB 5GB per second hub and an audio jack, but that is it. So no USB-C, no KVM functionality or any other mod cons we have come to expect. Moving on though, we can also note a small joystick used to navigate the OSD, and this is positioned on the right hand edge of the monitor. Speaking of the OSD itself then, generally I do think it's fine, though personally I do find it pretty ugly by modern standards. It is very easy to navigate with the joystick however, and things are sensibly laid out. I would add that there's not a ton of extra features, something I noticed particularly keenly after swapping from the MSI MPG271QRX, and there's also no way to remap the navigation keys quick settings, which personally annoys me. It will get you by overall, but I have used slicker systems. AOC does also offer its G-menu software however, giving users direct control over the monitor settings direct from your desktop. This works well. It is generally fully featured, though it can be a touch slow at times to load different menu options. I imagine most people, however, are just going to use it to update the firmware, which is a great ability to have on any OLED screen. That is it though for our quick look at the design of the monitor, and now we're going to move on to talk about our panel analysis, where we're using Portrait Display's Calman Ultimate software alongside an X-Rite i1 Display Pro Plus colorimeter. Starting off our testing then with the full screen brightness results, we can see a peak of 254 nits at 100% brightness, but then an incredibly low result when brightness is set to its minimum with a reading of just 1 nit. That itself is probably going to be too dim to be usable for most people, but I do think it's great to see that you can effectively make the screen as dim as you like with no limitation. One thing to be aware of, however, is that brightness is not fully uniform due to the auto brightness limiter, or ABL, and that is something that is very common for WOLED screens. This means that brightness of on-screen elements will decrease as the window size increases, resulting in fluctuating brightness depending on what is shown on screen. Thankfully, however, there is a uniform brightness mode in the OSD, and this essentially caps the brightness regardless of window size. So you won't get as bright an image for smaller on-screen elements, but there also won't be any annoying brightness changes. A 100% figure of just over 250 nits as well isn't too bad for this screen. When I reviewed the Corsair Xeneon 27QHD240W OLED that uses the same panel, it could only do 200 nits at maximum, so this is a pretty reasonable result for the AOC. Leaving that behind though and coming on to our gamut testing, we get nice and wide coverage as we'd expect from an OLED. The AG276QZD generally surpasses the sRGB space, and it offers 94.7% DCI-P3 and 96.7% Adobe RGB coverage, while we also get 72.1% reporting of the Rec 2020 color space. As for our grayscale testing then, at first I used completely default settings which for some reason used the warm color balance mode. As we can see here, this does indeed produce a warm colour balance with an average CCT or correlated colour temperature of 6039 K. To improve this, all I did was switch to the normal colour balance mode within the OSD. It's not even a custom setting, it is one of the presets readily available, and that instantly improved the CCT up to 6531 K, which is basically perfect. I'm really not sure why AOC defaults to the warm profile, but I would definitely recommend switching to normal for the most accurate colour balance. That's reflected in the average Delta E 2000 of just 1.49, which is very good for an out-of-the-box result, while gamma tracking is generally decent too, just being a fraction low but really nothing too significant. As I go into the rest of my testing then, considering that a simple change within the OSD did result in improved performance, I am going to be doing all of my future testing using that normal colour balance mode, as I think that's what most people would be using anyway. In terms of saturation accuracy then, overall it isn't terrible, but the wide gamut does result in some oversaturation when comparing to the sRGB colour space. Relative to the DCI-P3 colour space, however, the results are significantly improved as we would expect, with an average Delta E 2000 of just 1.46. As expected then, sRGB colour accuracy isn't the best due to that amount of oversaturation, and we see an average Delta E 2000 of 3.4, but a few colour channels are actually exceeding a Delta E of 5, which really isn't ideal. Once again though, things do improve when we compare against the DCI-P3 space, this time with a new average Delta E of 1.54 and a maximum below 3. Still, there is hope if you want to use the sRGB colour space, as AOC does provide an sRGB emulation mode within the OSD. Our initial impressions, however, are that it could well be improved, as it's actually clamping the gamut slightly too aggressively. Using this sRGB mode also locks you out from manually adjusting colour temperature, which is always a pain, and it seems that this mode is actually based on the warm colour profile, as once again we get results that are noticeably warm, this time with an average CCT of 5953K. Gamma tracking is very good in this mode, however, averaging 2.19. Saturation accuracy is also improved compared to its out-of-the-box settings, but again, as you can see, the sRGB emulation mode is actually too aggressive with its clamping of the colours, which does hurt accuracy slightly. As for colour accuracy though, this is again good, with an average Delta E 2000 of 1.82. However, it would be a lot better if the white balance was not overly warm. As you can see, it's actually those white and light grey shades that are the most inaccurate of the bunch, given the colour balance is closer to 6000K than it is to 6500K. Overall then, that sRGB mode is decent and will generally give you better results than using the monitor in its out-of-the-box state. However, I do think AOC could easily improve it, firstly by giving users control over the colour balance when using the sRGB mode, and also they just need to tone back on the aggressiveness of the sRGB clamp. Let's see though what we can achieve with a full calibration. It's no surprise then that we get great results when calibrating using CalMan Ultimate. Gamut locks in much better than what we saw from the sRGB emulation mode, and grayscale is pretty much flawless with superb gamma tracking as well. Saturation inaccuracy is almost completely removed with a new average delta E of 0.92, and color accuracy is also significantly improved with a new average delta E 2000 of 1.41. Just before we move on as well, it is just worth pointing out, as we would expect from an OLED, that we get incredibly good viewing angles with basically no visible color shift when viewed from the side. As with any OLED monitor then, there are a few quirks that you definitely need to be aware of. Some of these I have gone over in extensive detail in the past, but it is quickly worth summarizing what you need to know. The first then is the fact that as this is an LG WOLED first gen panel, it does have a heavy matte coating, and for some people this definitely won't be optimal, as many people do prefer glossy coatings for OLED, as it helps not only with text clarity but also offers the deepest black levels at the cost of more obvious reflections. Speaking of text clarity though, I personally do find text fringing to be an issue for these WOLED displays, and that's all due to the WRBG subpixel structure, which Windows definitely finds problematic. This for me is notably worse than what you'd get from a QD OLED monitor, so if you are in the market for a single screen for both work and gaming, and maybe you do a lot of text heavy stuff during the day, I really do think this is something to keep in mind when making a purchasing decision. The last thing to mention then is the risk of burn-in, which is something that is a factor for all OLED screens. Now, AOC does offer a few prevention measures in the OSD, like a pixel shift, there's an automatic dimming function, alongside a static logo dimming option. Lastly, AOC does also cover burn-in with a 3-year warranty, which is good to see, with the only asterisk being that you do need to undertake proper OLED maintenance, which I think is fair enough.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
Back to our testing though, and we're moving on to response times, where we're using the open source response time tool as developed by Tech Team GB. As with any OLED monitor then, we do get fantastic response times from the AG276QZD, so I'm not going to go into all the details in depth, but the average response times are around the 1 millisecond mark regardless of the refresh rate used. However, we do know that such fast response times don't mean motion clarity will be the same regardless of refresh rate. As you can see here, 240Hz offers a noticeable improvement in clarity versus 120Hz, which itself is a mile ahead of 60Hz. You may also be wondering how this 240Hz WOLED compares with the latest 360Hz QD OLEDs. So once again, I've brought in the MSI MPG271QRX that I reviewed recently as a comparison. I honestly don't think it is a massive difference, but you can see that the 360Hz QD OLED image is just that bit clearer, particularly when looking at the white lines on the UFO and the alien's face. However, I do think that this 240Hz WOLED still offers better clarity than a 360Hz LCD in the form of MSI's Oculux NXG253R, so it is very, very impressive overall. As for what all of that means for real-world gaming, I had a really good time with the AOC AG276QZD. Being 1440p resolution, it's not too hard to drive at frame rates near 240Hz, and it worked fine with G-Sync 2 for whenever you drop below that mark. Still, there's no doubt in my mind it looks and works the best the closer you get to 240 FPS, really making it excel for competitive multiplayer titles like me playing Call of Duty here. Even then, it still works very well for some slower paced single-player action or RPG games too, where you get all the OLED benefits including infinite contrast ratio and those still rapid response times. All in all, as you will have no doubt gathered from any of my previous OLED monitor reviews, I really do think this technology is just fantastic for gaming, and that is no different with the AG276QZD. Of course, HDR is a big part of any OLED monitor's arsenal, and we find here a total of 5 different HDR modes within the OSD. As it turns out, the HDR game, movie and picture mode are all basically the same, and I don't actually recommend using any of those settings as they're not particularly accurate. The display HDR mode is the most accurate, with decent if not mind-blowing EOTF tracking, as it is just slightly too bright across the range, but it is the best of the bunch. Then however, there is also the HDR native mode. As you can see, this mode is way too cool, with the CCT hitting 8385K, so the image takes on a really noticeable blue tint. Why bother including this mode, I hear you ask? Well, it turns out that the only reason I can see at least for the HDR native mode to exist is so that AOC can advertise a peak brightness of 1000 nits. Now that claim is technically accurate, as we can see here, as both the 1% and 2% APLs hit just over 1020 nits when using the HDR native mode, before dropping down as the window size increases. However, it is just such a cool colour balance that I really don't recommend anyone use it. The display HDR mode is by far the best of the bunch, and its brightness is still decent for a WOLED, peaking just under 800 nits before rolling off. The 100% brightness result of 150 nits isn't great, however, but is in line with what we've seen from other WOLED screens that use the same panel. Back to the AG276QZD, however, and we're now looking at overall colour accuracy of the display HDR mode. The average delta E2000 is higher when we do include luminance error, as it is just a fraction brighter than it should be, as we saw from those grayscale results previously. Removing luminance error, however, and we see an average result of 2.05, with the biggest offenders being the cyan and the green channels, which are always the most problematic, given no screen we have tested to date is able to fully cover the Rec 2020 colour space. Wrapping up this review then, I have to make one thing clear right from the off. The AOC AG276QZD is all about the price. By using the same first-gen LG WOLED panel as everyone else, it's obviously not going to fix any of the issues that are inherent to that panel technology. I'm talking things like text fringing, the heavy matte coating, or full screen brightness being a bit low relative to other screens. On top of that, there's also a few corners that AOC have cut to help reduce the price, including a lack of USB-C or KVM functionality. The two HDMI ports are only of the 2.0 variety rather than HDMI 2.1, and general build quality does feel just a little bit creaky, though it is fine when sat still on a desk. However, and this is a big however, absolutely none of that changes the fact that this is still a 240Hz OLED monitor that's currently on sale for less than £500 here in the UK. And for that money, you still get near instant response times and incredible motion clarity at 240Hz. That really is next level compared to an LCD, as is the HDR performance thanks to the per pixel dimming nature of OLED displays. As I mentioned at the start of this video though, pricing is always relative, and I know £500 is still a lot of money to drop on a new gaming monitor, but it's compared to the rest of the OLED market where this screen really looks like particularly good value. Take the LG 27GR95QEB for instance, which is still around £700. The Alienware AW2725DF is just under £700 right now, and the MSI MAG 271QPX is about 750 quid. And that makes this AOC the cheapest OLED monitor I found in the UK by almost £200 at the time of filming. Even if we compare it to 240Hz LCD displays, on OC UK right now, all but two of them are listed for more than £400, at which point I really think if gaming is your primary concern, stepping up to OLED is just the logical thing to do. In summary then, no, the AOC AG276QZD isn't perfect, and as impressive as OLED technology can be, I appreciate that this kind of monitor won't be for everyone. What I do think, however, is that at £500, you are getting a heck of a lot of monitor for your money, and it really is all the benefits of OLED at the lowest price we have ever seen, which makes me so excited about reviewing this monitor. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've got any questions on how we test or any other monitors that you might want recommendations on, do let me know your thoughts. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and ding that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload a new video. And you can also come over to our Discord server if you want to carry on the conversation, and that's linked down in the description. While there, you can also find a link to our merch store if you want to pick up a t-shirt and help support the channel. Speaking of, if you're feeling particularly generous, you can also back us on Patreon. That is it for this one though guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.